Welcome to the Love Your Inner Athlete podcast, your go-to source for all things mental fitness and sports. Whether you're an athlete, coach, parent, or professional, you will learn as you join us to dive into inspiring conversations with those who have worked to develop their mental fitness. You will hear from people who've put in the work as either an athlete, coach, parent, or professional. In each episode, we bring you discussions and expert insights on developing resilience, focus, and mindset. Discover the concepts of mental fitness and learn how to use it to create consistent, durable confidence in both sports and life. I'm your host, Hans Schulstead. Let's get started. Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast. I'm Hans Schulstead. On the Inner Athlete Podcast, we talk all things mental fitness. Today, happy to be joined by a longtime friend who I met way back in the day, probably early to late 2000s, Bob?
Yeah, you know what? I don't want to age myself. I'm not, but close to 25 years ago.
Yeah. So our guest today is Bob Gazich. Known Bob for a long time, and I thought he would be a great guest. We love to have a variety of guests, and so welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Hans. I'm really excited to be here, so I appreciate you bringing me on.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about your coaching business and how long have you been at it? Who do you work with?
Well, I do a little bit of leadership development, actually. And so I've been doing that for a number of years. And so my business varies as far as working with executives on means and mechanisms to improve their interaction with their employees. I've been doing it for, 15, 20 years now. So quite a while.
So for the listeners, how can people find you and what is the name of your business?
They could just find me if they go to Bob at TAP, T-A-P, your, Y-O-U-R, potential, Potential.com. So Bob at tapyourpotential.com. Yep.
All right. Well, and then you also do some work at St. John's and St. Ben's. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Correct. I'm in their global business leadership department. I'm a visiting faculty member here. I was here for 10 or 12 years, and then I left in maybe 14, 15. And then I came back just after COVID in 21. And I teach in their leadership course, and I have a lot of fun with that. I've also done the organizational behavior class. So it's mixing a little bit of psychology along with how psych works into organizational settings. And then I've done a capstone course, a strategy capstone course for them as well. So I really enjoy it because I think there's a big developmental piece for the students. They're naturally developing in their course and in their lives. And it's amazing, Hans, how much development takes place. I would say 95% of our students are typically 18 to 22-year-olds. Some of the Johnny hockey players will get up to 23 and 24 when they're graduating. Developmentally, it's fascinating to see how much human development takes place between 18 and 22. It's fascinating, the growth that takes place, and it's fun to see.
Okay. So tell me about like the biggest or the greatest qualities you see in leaders. Like what do today's leaders need to work on to lead in this more chaotic world?
I think the biggest piece, and it could be biased as I say this because I come with a psychology background, but I think the big piece, and we do spend a little bit of time talking about emotional intelligence, is that EQ piece. And I use a definition that on leadership that a gentleman wrote in 1978, James McGregor Burns. It was a Pulitzer Prize winning book titled Leadership. And he defined leadership. And there, I would argue and say prior to that, you didn't see a lot of definitions of leadership in the literature that he basically defined. And what took off and it was operationalized at Ohio State University in the mid 1980s was this thing called transformational leadership. And it's all about a relationship between leader and follower that do things mutually together to create the change that they desire. It's not that great man or great person theory that this leader has all the answers and all the, they do have the power, but it's really like together we do things, together we make the change, together we implement the change in the strategy. That's the goal or the vision. So attributes are high is necessary, an ability to navigate power and understand power and how to use power, power
Mm-hmm.
with versus power over. And then a theory that, I mean, I didn't create it, it's situational leadership theory by Hersey and Blanchard, who've done a lot of work in corporate America. But it's fascinating how they look at the individual from an ability standpoint and a willingness standpoint. And the ability is having the knowledge, skills, and abilities to execute the task. And the willingness is kind of the emotional, it's the efficacious piece. Do I think I can do it? And so sometimes we stumble when we don't have the requisite skills to execute the task. And sometimes we stumble because we don't have the confidence to do the task. And when we're in leadership roles, I think that there's a give and take on you and I understanding where's this individual that's reporting into me? Where are they at on this continuum of willing and able? And how, because ultimately, I think what I want to do is to give an overview of what I want and then allow the individual to execute the task to the best of their ability. I want to avoid micromanaging at all costs. That doesn't do any of us any good. So, that's, a leader having some self-awareness and ability to connect with people, and then an understanding that my role in this position is to develop people and develop my direct reports. And how I do that is dependent on what they need to develop.
Okay. So switching gears a little bit, can you talk a little bit about the different roles you've had in sports and hockey and what you've learned from them?
Yeah, the first thing that I learned, I really love the game. Hockey's an awesome game. It's a fun game to play. It's a fun game to watch. It's a fun game to talk to people about. But my entry into hockey was years ago with the North Stars in the sales and marketing role. I sold season tickets and group packages for them way back when the Guns owned the team back in the late 80s. And then I went through some of the transition pieces from Howard Baldwin to Norm Green, and then when they transitioned out of town. And then I recently, when I left school, I ran the Madison Capitals for a period of time. Ryan Suter owned them. And so I was president of that USHL team, and I oversaw the business operation. And that was a fascinating opportunity to work. I had a staff that I worked with, and we worked with the building in setting up, dates to play games and trying to, negotiate deals on food and beverage and that sort of thing. So so my hockey stuff was on the business side, and then with my Tap Your Potential, I've done some transition work with pro hockey players, NHL hockey players that were transitioning out of hockey into the private sector, and what was their next step. I remember when I first started doing some of that, I talked to a couple agents that I know here in town, and I said, hey, I just want to talk with some of your players that play in the minor leagues. And they said, no, you need to talk to the $8 million a year guy as well. They need to have a transition. They need to have a plan going forward in their lives as well, because it's a big hole once they leave the sport and create a whole new identity for themselves. That's been my involvement with the game.
So when you do that, do you use like a series of assessments with them to help them with that? Or do you do it through conversation, or how do you go about doing that?
Yes and yes. Yeah, so I use an ability battery just to kind of check what their current status is from an ability standpoint. I use a strong interest inventory, and I've used some like the Myers-Briggs and stuff. So I kind of get a picture of who they are, but then we have a conversation about what it is. Did you go to college? Did you complete college? What were you majoring in school? One of the things, it's a real inspiring thing to do. It's a really interesting thing to do. I think sometimes what they find so challenging, and it's kind of a sad piece, is that when they were playing, they were on everybody's A list, and business people wanted to talk to them, wanted them to come to maybe business functions and that sort of thing. But once they retire, everybody kind of forgets about them. And even some of the business people that they had worked with and had somewhat of a relationship with, It's kind of like now that they're looking for an opportunity to transition to do something, and they've been, that part of the relationship has been a bit neglected or deficient,
That
and
makes
that's
sense.
that's
Well, and
hard.
well, when you were talking, the other thing that it made me think, and one of the things I see in my work is that for a lot of guys when they're done, or and women for that matter, is they lose all those relationships and those friendships where they're not as close. And one of the things I've kind of learned through life and learned with working with people is having, especially as a male, having good close friends who you can bounce things off of or talk to about stuff is really important.
Absolutely. And part of you wants to get in on the front end, but they're, and I understand their agents don't, they don't want you to have a conversation with their player about, hey, what's life going to be after sport? They want their
Right.
they want they want their athlete just focused on that sport. And that's a bit of a challenge. That would be one thing. I don't know if the NHL does it or not, or any sport for that matter, but some of those rookie orientation programs should be that you're going to get exposed naturally to a lot of people, and you're going to get exposed to people in business. We don't want you to spend hours and hours on end thinking about life after your sport. But one of the things that you would think about doing is, as you connect with these people, is to think about, would this be something that I would want to do and potentially could do? And on some
Sure.
level, you would work with them on maybe having that sort of conversation. So when they're done, they don't get ghosted, as happens quite frequently.
Okay. So you have two sons, one that plays college hockey and one that played college hockey. Tell
Yep.
me about what it was like guiding them through the process of juniors and on to college.
You always wish you had a redo with your oldest because you,
Yeah.
you you learn so much after they have that experience. I guess with our oldest, he's 28 now, and you heard a little bit about junior hockey, but it wasn't on the radar. I didn't think at the time with a lot of people here in Minnesota. Basically, this is what junior hockey is, a need that needs to happen if your son wants to go play college hockey, even Division III. He was drafted into the North American Hockey League, and he spent a little bit of time in that league. And then he ultimately ended up playing up in Canada in Northern Ontario Hockey League. And his experience was a really good experience, I would say. His first coach was really hard, but he also had the best interest of the players in mind, which
Mhm.
made the hard piece easier because he did really want you to develop. He did want you to grow. That was interesting. I think one of the things, he was drafted by a team down in Texas. And I think the
Mhm.
big surprise was when I went down there, it was like, holy cow. There, I mean, you would see a kid from Texas or a couple of them, someone from Florida, like all over kind of non-hockey markets
Mhm.
outside of Michigan, Minnesota, Massachusetts. And it's like, boy, there's a lot of good hockey players. That was a big eye opener for me and maybe even for him. But he had a really good experience. He had really good experience with his coaches and that sort of thing. Our middle son, he left early to play his senior year of high school in the North American Hockey League. His was a bit more of a challenge, and it could have been developmentally, but the team that he was on wasn't winning, and there was a lot of stress involved with that, and it was kind of hard on everybody. And then things got kind of cut short with COVID that year, and so he loved hockey and was really passionate about it. But I think that experience made him kind of step off the track for a little bit to say, is this what I want to do? And I think that was important for him to do. I think part of it was a little unfortunate that he did that because with COVID, it kind of slowed some of his development down. And so that was a bit hard. And he too eventually ended up north of the border up in the Northern Ontario League with a big competitor that our oldest ended up in Timmins. And our middle one, Tommy, he was in Powassan. That league is kind of central in Northern Ontario. It's a pretty good hockey league. They would feed a number of their players into the OHL, where a lot of those players would go.
Mhm.
That was a really good league, but maybe more of a challenge if you want to play college hockey in the States, I would say, because East Coast people would go to those Canadian leagues that are more southern, Southern Ontario. the CCHL and the like that. So, but yeah, it was a big learning experience. I mean, you go from 17, 18-year-old to kind of grizzled in a real short period of time because it's intense, it's competitive. People are coming and going, they're bringing players in, moving players. So it's not for the faint of heart to go into that route. And I would think, that I'm naturally not as close to it now, but with the NCAA ruling in the last year, with the players from the CCHL, the major juniors coming down, that whole fabric of junior hockey has changed, I think, a fair amount. And it's gotten, more intense, I would say, with those players coming into NCAA, with how the USHL is operating, and in turn, how the North American Hockey League, the BCHL, the Alberta
Mhm.
League, the Manitoba, all those leagues. So a big change on the front. But as parents, you just have to be supportive. If the boys wanted to do it, and navigate with them the highs and the lows. And I suppose
Mhm.
that's what you do in life in general, anyways, as a parent. You try to give them a foundation and then let them go out into the world and kind of experience it and see how they can navigate those channels. But I would say someone like yourself that is a good person, competent in your field, is a real value added for parents and for the athlete to be able to connect with you and have a conversation. You're a huge value added that I don't know how many people are aware, that it's just nice that you're, in the case that we're talking about with our sons playing junior hockey, to be able to have someone that you can call other than your parents and is trained in that area, and has an
Mhm.
understanding of human development and psychology, and especially in that age category, 17, 18 to
Mhm.
22 and beyond. So I don't know, did I hit on
Yeah,
what
no,
you?
you answered it. So, what do you see as different today about the attitudes towards mental performance and mental health as opposed to when we were growing up, or even
Well,
in the last 10 years?
yeah, I think it's so much more prevalent. And when you hear, I haven't heard a lot, but that a defensive lineman for
The Cowboys?
Dallas Cowboys, what was it, 2 weeks ago? And it's just so
Yeah.
crushing. Here at school, you bring it up a little bit, and there's awareness, which is a great thing. But you really do want, I would say it's like, okay, I think we've done a great job in creating the awareness. What do we need to do about eliminating the potential shame? Because I
Mhm.
still think there's a little piece of that shame, and maybe with the athlete, and maybe with the male athlete, because we're so capable, we're so strong. You can't let a little something down really affect you, or you shouldn't tell anybody. That whole thought process to me is crazy, because it's like, it'd be me taking my glasses off and not wanting to wear my glasses in public because people would know my eyes aren't perfect. And why would I wear braces, or why would I have a hearing aid? So I think, if a magic wand is, how could we figure out to get that person to realize that their experience isn't unusual, and that there's lifelines out there, there's people, family, what have you, that you might be low and you might be in a really dark spot, but we'll get you up a little bit and we'll get you into some better lighting, but give us a chance.
Think the awareness about it has changed. And so it's become more acceptable on the awareness part. But the thing I so often see is what you're talking about is that, and the other thing that I would add is the awareness. One of the unintended consequences of that awareness is that when you pair it with social media, like what I often tell people is we forget that kids think we think the same way as them. And so
Yeah.
when you talk about awareness with mental health, if they can't do it perfect, then they think they're doing it wrong. And that's why
Oh,
there's that shame attached to it. You know what I mean?
yep. No,
Yep.
exactly. We're naturally all different. That's one of the things I talk to my students about. I said, if you're a kid seeking perfection, you know, just drop it, as best you can. I said, focus on being effective. You hit your target. It may be messy, but go listen to anybody's, Hall of Fame speech and the people that helped them along the way, and that it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't perfect. It was
Mm-hmm.
messy. There was fingerprints on the window. but they kept and they persevered. That need to be perfect is not
Mhm.
realistic and it's not healthy, in my opinion.
Well, and it's something that you can't really achieve. So
No,
tell me, what's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten in your life, and how have you used it, or when do you use it?
I think the best piece of advice was just trying to be good to yourself. And, on some level, success is in the eyes of the beholder, and
Hmm.
you're the beholder. So
Hmm.
if you create your definition of success to be, in essence, being above ground today, I'm
Hmm.
successful today because I'm above ground,
Yeah.
versus my success is driven by my bank account, the square footage of my home, and the number of celebrities that I'm connected with, then I think that can drive someone. Success is really just being above ground and having another day to take another swing. And I think there's so much truth to that, just to be easier on yourself, yet driven to want to get better every day, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yes, that makes sense. Speaking of, I'm going off script here a little bit of
Yeah,
the questions I have you, but like when you, or that I sent you, but you talked about being good to yourself. What are your some go-to self-care, safe self-care strategies or activities?
I suppose some of it is having experience that you realize when you get a little wear in your tire that this thing really isn't over. Like the world isn't collapsing, it's not coming to an end. So experience has been beneficial. It also just kind of stepping out of the situation and trying to find things from a spiritual standpoint that's been helpful. I find things in nature that have been helpful. Just kind of removing myself and just kind of getting away. I even try to put the technology down and not be so tied to it. I tease everybody and say, I like the technology, but this drug is a rotten addiction. And sometimes it's nice just to forget about that, just to be with those that you love or you're connected with. But those are my, nature, the spiritual stuff, and exercise is always a nice thing. To go hit the gym and get on a treadmill or to do. I like to do leg stuff sometimes, even though I've had my knees replaced.
Yeah. So who are the biggest mentors and the biggest influences in your life from either a personal or professional perspective?
My dad's been away for a long time, but my parents were really, really good influencers to me. When I was going through the doctoral program, I had a couple really good people that were inside the department chair and even a mentor outside the program that were really good. And so they were really good, and really helpful. And my wife is great too. She's always been a great supporter of my craziness.
Yeah, well,
And
I've often said to you, I wonder about her judgment.
I know. Don't say it too loud, but that's so true. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
funny. So
Well,
I
and you,
outkick my coverage and I feel good about it.
yeah, but
Yeah.
and that's the other thing. Like, I think one of the most underrated decisions in life is who you marry. And it's
Oh,
so important if
absolutely.
you pick
Oh,
yeah.
and I don't know how it was for you. I mean, she was just someone sweet and cute and, comparable value. It was that more instinct type stuff versus cognitive. Everything felt right. There wasn't any heavy lifting or it was just easy,
At
you
least for
know?
you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's so true. Oh, that's so funny.
So tell me this, like, so you've had kids play multiple sports, and
Yep.
so you've
Yep.
you've got to probably experience coaching through your kids' eyes, right?
Yep.
Okay. What do you think are the characteristics of the best coaches that they've had or you've had?
They like the kids. They like the sport. They want to develop the kids. They have a
Mhm.
relationship with the kids. It's like really basic stuff. And they want your kid to be successful. You know, I mean, those have been the best ones. I don't mind that they push my kid and maybe even got a little loud periodically. I can understand
Mhm.
that. But on the backside, it was because, I want you to be successful and you have the talent or you have the gifts or the capability. They made them feel like they were part of the whole process. So I would say that these coaches had a pretty well developed ego themselves, and they didn't take themselves too seriously. They were competent and they loved the sport. Because conversely, you need to ask me, like the coaches that, it's like, I don't know why you're coaching. You're not here developing these kids. You're here yelling at them and threatening them, and that it's not getting the result that you're looking for.
So how did you help your kids through those coaches that were that way?
I told them that they're old, like that's how I grew up, and they're trying to motivate you. And that's the only way that they know how to motivate you. But they don't know you, so they don't know how to motivate you. And if they would just take time to get to know you, they would say that, screaming and hollering and threatening isn't the outcome that I'm going to achieve, But it wasn't easy. I don't know that they would believe me. I think one day I almost died in our living room when our oldest came up to his middle brother and said, "Hey, listen to Dad. He knows what he's talking about." Geez, I said I almost dropped over dead that day. But some of it is just, I suppose your kids, they know you so well, so they maybe just don't listen to you quite as much as you would like, not as a means of bossing them around, but as a means of just getting them to that equilibrium again and being able to breathe.
Yeah, well, and I think, I'm reminded of why through this conversations, like why we clicked way back when we were doing what was it? The fair play point stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
And one of the hazards of raising independent, critically thinking kids is that they're not going to take everything you say at face value. Like you want kids that are committed, not just compliant. I mean, you need some compliance, right? But you want, and the older they get, the more commitment you need to help them move towards. So, well, you've covered my question about like what advice would you give parents who are trying to help their kids through sports today? Is there anything else you'd like to share from your experiences as either as a parent, professor? Actually, I got a great question for you. I just thought of one. So sometimes what happens is like kids get to college or kids who go play juniors, like what advice would you give to parents who are trying to walk that line between having their kid leave home yet and wanting them, to execute and become a good college student or a successful college student, and yet the kid is struggling? What would you say to those parents or those students that fall into that category?
Well, if someone is struggling, I would say I want them to try to seek out someone that can help you with the area that you're struggling in. And so you don't have to be Hercules, and so if there's an area you're struggling, who can you talk to have that conversation? For the most part, the stuff that we're struggling on, it's not terribly unusual. As a parent, you just want to support your kid. But also, like we as parents, none of us want to fail. None of us want our children to fail. But there's something learning when our kids fail. And those maybe are the hardest lessons. But, I've done succession planning for family-owned businesses. As I saw how they dressed, I saw the vehicles they were driving. So I knew that they were pretty successful, at least, on the outside materially. But what I was amazed with was how many of them failed and how many times they failed. I was like shocked. And I was like, I watch more sports on TV. I don't really watch, I'm aware of reality, but I'm like, they should have, these stories are really inspiring because it's amazing how, they were down and out and all the odds were against them and they just got back up on that horse and they kept doing it. And I thought that was just so important. And I think, parents are just allow them to fail. I think sometimes when we fail, then we know where that line is. If you never fail, you never know where that line is. And there's always more that you could accomplish, but when you shortchange yourself, so kind of embrace it, but who wakes up today is saying, "Hey, I want to fail today."
That's true.
Nobody in their right mind. But when you see about what's your definition of success, my definition of it's giving it your all and then seeing where the chips fall, and it worked or it didn't work. We as parents, we want our kids to be the top on the top power play unit, the top penalty kill, the top line. We want them to be getting the conversations with all the junior programs and those sorts of things. But just know that it happens in stages and it's different for each kid. And make sure your kids are enjoying it. You want your kid to have talent. Your kid has to enjoy it. The coach has to like your kid and like your kid's warts. If your coach doesn't like your kid's warts, then pray that your kids are healthy too. If you have those legs of those chairs aligned, then you see. Because on the flip side, from a college or a team, it's based on my kid's skill set. It's what they're looking for, and I suppose that's what you're hoping. I'm hoping that that a kid on the junior team has been called up or is going to be aging out or what have you. I'm hoping that the kid with there's a couple seniors that have the skill set that my kid does when he's looking to come in as a first year freshman, and but your kids as we know, your kids have to really like it, and you'll know that they like it when you're telling them to, Tommy, quit shooting pucks at 10:30 at night, or when the neighbor would come over like literally at 10:30 and say, hey, Mary and I are trying to watch a movie, and could you ask him to quit shooting pucks, in the dark? And it's like, okay, that's when your kid is all in, when, it's like take a break versus pushing.
So Bob at tapyourpotential.com is your email address and your website. And it sounds like you do succession planning for small businesses and family businesses, and you work with players. And I think that's great. And I didn't know that about you, with family businesses, and that's really like a great need. And a lot of times what I've seen in my office is that can be a really messy transition because there's so much involved with so much emotion and family dynamics involved with that. So thanks for joining me today. It was great. I enjoyed the conversation. You have a great day. Say hi to all your family that I know.
I will.